Hi, Stephen Mirassou, Wine Saves Lives, and the Stephen Kent Winery, coming to you from my normal recording space, my front patio here in downtown Livermore. We're about to release a brand new wine for our BDX members, for our Bordeaux varietal collection members. And it's a Cabernet Sauvignon from Lencioni Vineyard, one of a site we don't use anymore, but we did make wine from for 10 years practically, off and on from 2013 through 2022. Really beautiful site. Odd site, planted at the end of a housing development in a horseshoe kind of a fashion. It was like looking at the face of a clock down. The vines were planted on a relatively steep hill, not really high, but relatively steep. And it was planted in a circular fashion so that the ripening of this particular 5-acre vineyard was not uniform. But what it did offer, a couple of different clones of Cabernet Sauvignon, did offer some really interesting variability in terms of ripeness and in terms of overall flavor and structural profile, given the clonal differences and given the fact that there really was a ripening arc of, let's say, 10 to 14 days from when the earliest fruit was ready to go until the last fruit was ready to go. It was a very interesting site. Some friends of ours were the original owners of the vineyard, and it's now in its third set of hands, I think, at this point in time. We blended 2021 and 2022 Cabernet from Lencioni into a wine that we call the Murphy. Got a little picture of the bottle here. The Murphy. The Murphy is named for my youngest daughter, Sara Murphy Mirassou. She is our director of hospitality, runs our wine club and our tasting room. The name was very propitious. It's unusual, I think, if you were to name a child of yours after somebody who had a very specific talent, and that child ended up doing something that was very closely tied to what her namesake did. But this is the case for Sara Murphy Mirassou, who was named for Sarah Wyborg Murphy, whose husband Gerald Murphy formed, with the two of them, formed a team that were famous in the 1920s and 30s for their support of the arts in France. They were expatriate Americans. They were close friends with Hemingway and Fitzgerald and Picasso, the greatest writers and artists of the time. The Murphys were there financially, were there emotionally to support these folks. And I remember having a master's in literature and an American literature focus. That time period really is probably the most fertile period in American literature. That period from the 1900s, 1900, let's say, to 1950, but even more condensed, telescoped from 1919 until the early 1930s, when some of the greatest books ever written were written by these Americans who were supported by the Murphys, having been and still being compelled by those artists and by that time period. You can't read biographies of that time without coming across the Murphys. And I remember when I was probably, I don't know, 30-ish, beginning note taking on a screenplay about their lives. Very tragic in a lot of ways. But I think for me, still, maybe more, especially at that point 20 years ago, but even now, were emblems of how you treat people, how you create emotional sustenance for people. The hospitality aspect of their lives was something that's incredibly compelling, and certainly something I think a lot about when I think about how people are treated at Stephen Kent when they come to taste. Sara, my fourth of four children, all adults now, was always the one that potentially would be the front of the house person. She fell closely to my, if she were the apple from my tree, it was right at the base that she fell. She always seemed to enjoy being around people and talking to people, even as a young kid running around Stephen Kent dinners at the winery. She was always a humorous and emotional force. And you never know what their kids are going to turn out to be or what they're going to turn out to want to do. But she has followed that original impulse very closely, working through restaurants and now working as the front of the house folk, as it were, the person at Stephen Kent who is most involved in creating the experience for our members and for our guests. And we wanted to name a wine after her and name a wine after her and her namesake as a way of highlighting the real, truly important thing that we do, which is taking care of people, of making life a little easier, making life hopefully a lot more delicious on a day-to-day basis, but understanding that a little bit of kindness and a little bit of passion for what we do, I think goes a long way toward communicating how important people are to us, not just to our business, but to us as a family. And this 100% Cabernet, I think, is emblematic of that effort and that desire. It's a wine with very little new oak. It's a wine, I think, that from two really different vintages. 21 was a much cooler vintage than 22, tended to produce wines that were more acid driven. 22, a little richer. So I think that combination works really beautifully with this wine. I know I'm enjoying a sip of it right now. We only make about 100 cases or so of each of these releases for the BDX collection. They go to our wine club members first, and if there's anything left over, other folks are welcome to enjoy. We definitely pour the wine at the tasting room for the first month or so after its release to give people an opportunity to taste what we're doing most currently and to taste what we're really proud of. So thank you to Sara Murphy for being an inspiration, still an inspiration. And thank you to my daughter for being really good at what she does and for loving the wine life. Stephen Mirassou, Wine Saves Lives. Hope to see you soon.